A grieving billionaire opened his door on a stormy night and found two 4-year-old girls trembling in the rain. They asked for nothing, only to stay together. What he discovered about their past and his own would shatter his silence and change all their lives forever. Gideon Crosswell woke at exactly 6 a.m. He never needed an alarm anymore. For one brief mercy, about 5 seconds, his mind was empty. No past, no pain, no memory, just breath. Then it returned. Wren, his daughter, 4 years old, gone. Gideon sat on the edge of the bed, feet pressed into the cold hardwood floor, shoulders slumped as if gravity had doubled overnight. The ocean beyond the cliffside mansion was invisible in the early darkness, but he could hear it low, constant, relentless, like grief, like time. He didn't turn on the lights as he walked to the bathroom. He knew this house too well. Every corner, every door, every place where laughter used to live. On the sink sat a small plastic cup with faded cartoon whales. He hadn't moved it in a year. In the drawer below, a tiny hairbrush tangled with strands of light brown hair he could never bring himself to throw away. Gideon looked at his reflection. Dark circles carved permanent shadows beneath his eyes. His face looked older than 41. Not from age, but from absence. Coffee, black, no sugar, toast he wouldn't eat. As the coffee machine hummed, Gideon walked down the hallway, deliberately avoiding the photographs on the wall. Smiling faces, birthday candles, beach sand in small fists. He stopped in front of a closed door. Wren's room. His fingers brushed the doorknob, then pulled away as if burned. Not today, he whispered to no one. Since Wren's death, the mansion had become too large, too quiet. A museum of memories where only one visitor still wandered. And today the calendar insisted marked 1 full year. 1 year of breathing without living. The living room looked untouched, frozen in a moment that never finished. A blanket folded on the couch the way Wren used to leave it after pretending it was a superhero cape. A pair of tiny socks tucked beneath the coffee table, discovered months ago and left there on purpose. Colorful building blocks arranged exactly as they had been on her last afternoon at home. Gideon wouldn't let the housekeeper touch any of it. People said it wasn't healthy. They said he needed to move forward, as if grief were a hallway with a clearly marked exit. Sometimes Gideon sat on the floor and picked up a toy just to feel its weight in his hand. Solid. Real. Proof that Wren hadn't been a dream. His phone buzzed on the table. Janine, his sister. Dinner tonight. 7 p.m. We're worried about you. Please come. He stared at the screen until it dimmed. Concern didn't help. Pity didn't heal. Conversations filled with careful pauses and forced optimism only reminded him that everyone else was still moving. Gideon muted the phone. He pulled open the heavy curtains. Gray morning light spilled into the room, revealing dust motes drifting lazily through the air. Outside, the neighborhood slept peacefully, houses filled with families, children still tucked into beds, mornings waiting to begin. Once Gideon hated noise. The endless questions, the loud cartoons, the sound of small feet racing down hallways. Now he would have traded everything he owned to hear that chaos again, just once. He grabbed his work folder from the entry table. Architectural plans drawn with mechanical precision, devoid of joy. His colleagues said his designs were clean. They were empty. At the front door, Gideon paused, hand resting on the locks he had installed after Wren died. 3 locks, as if steel could stop loss from entering. He stepped outside into the cool morning air. The house behind him stood tall and silent. A monument to everything he had lost. Gideon didn't drive to the office. Not today. Instead, he took the familiar road along the cliffs toward the cemetery. His hands knew the turns without thought. He had made this drive so many times, it felt carved into his bones. At the florist near the coastal highway, no one asked questions. A bouquet of sunflowers waited behind the counter. Same as always, the woman asked gently. Gideon nodded. Sunflowers had been Wren's favorite. She called them happy flowers because they always followed the sun. The sky darkened as he drove, clouds thickening, wind pushing hard against the car. The radio crackled with a weather alert, storms moving in faster than expected. Gideon smiled faintly. He'd been living inside a storm for a year. At the cemetery, rain began as a mist, then grew heavier. Gideon didn't open an umbrella. He never did. He welcomed the cold, the wet, something external to match what lived inside him. He stopped in front of a small white headstone. Wren Crosswell, beloved daughter. Gideon knelt and placed the sunflowers carefully at the base. He didn't speak aloud. Words felt inadequate here. But in his heart, the same sentence repeated like a quiet prayer he no longer believed would be answered. I'm still here. I don't know how. Thunder rolled in the distance. When Gideon finally stood and turned back toward the car, the rain had grown fierce. Wind howled between the trees, bending branches low. He didn't know it yet, but this storm wouldn't end at the cemetery. Before nightfall, it would follow him home, and it would knock on his door. Gideon returned home drenched. He parked in the garage and didn't get out right away. He sat behind the wheel watching rain stream down the windshield in crooked lines, turning the world into a blur. The storm had grown teeth. Wind rattled the garage door like it wanted inside. His chest felt heavy, like visiting Wren's grave had taken what little oxygen he had left. He finally stepped into the mansion, dropping his keys onto the entry table with a dull clack. Wet shoes squeaked on polished wood. The sound traveled too far, and the empty space bounced off walls that no longer held laughter. The clock on the kitchen wall read 4:00 p.m. Gideon realized he hadn't eaten all day. His stomach didn't complain. Hunger was something his body had stopped requesting after grief rewired everything. He toweled his hair, then wandered through the living room without purpose. Mail sat in a neat pile on the table, bills, invitations, reminders that life kept moving even when he didn't. His phone buzzed. Janine, dinner at 7. We're picking you up. Don't make me beg. Gideon stared at the message until his eyes stung. He could already picture it, warm lights, forced smiles, everyone speaking slowly, like he was fragile glass. He set the phone face down. Thunder cracked so loudly the house trembled. Gideon flinched despite himself. A memory flashed, Wren sprinting into his room during storms, climbing into his bed with desperate trust. Sky monsters, she used to whisper. Gideon poured a small glass of whiskey. Not for pleasure, for numbness. He sank into the armchair and turned on a single lamp. He preferred dim light now. Brightness felt like an accusation. Outside, the storm escalated. Rain hammered the windows. Wind moaned through the trees. Then something else cut through it. A different sound. Closer. Human. A soft, uncertain knock at the front door. Gideon froze whiskey halfway to his lips. The knock came again, lighter this time, as if whoever stood outside already expected him not to answer. Gideon stood slowly. He didn't want to open the door. Not because he was unkind, because he was hollow. Because surprises were dangerous when your heart was already cracked. The knock came again. Weak, polite. He walked to the front entry and stared at the 3 locks he'd installed after Wren died, like metal could keep pain from entering. His hand trembled on the deadbolt. Click, click, click. He opened the door. Rain rushed in with the wind, cold and sharp. The porch light spilled onto the stone steps and revealed 2 small figures standing close together. 2 little girls, both around 4 years old. One stood slightly in front, shoulders squared as if trying to grow taller through sheer will. Her dark hair was gathered into uneven pigtails, and her eyes, wide, watchful, never left Gideon's face. She gripped the other girl's hand like it was a lifeline. The smaller girl's lips were pale from cold. Wet hair clung to her cheeks. She shivered so hard her entire frame trembled, but she still tried to stand straight. Gideon's breath caught, because the smaller girl looked like no. She looked like Wren. Same curve of the cheeks, same little chin, same mouth that tilted higher on the right when she tried not to cry. It was impossible. His knees went soft. His fingers tightened on the doorframe. The brave one swallowed. "Sir, we're sorry," she said, voice thin but steady. We need help." The smaller girl blinked rain from her lashes and whispered, barely audible, "Please. We haven't eaten." Gideon couldn't speak. He could only stare like his grief had walked outside and taken human form. The brave girl added quickly, as if afraid of being misunderstood, "Just bread. We'll leave when the rain stops. We won't touch anything. We promise." The smaller girl's eyes lifted to his dark, honest, exhausted. Then she said something that pierced him clean through, "I'll eat slowly. So you don't regret it." Gideon's throat locked. A child shouldn't know how to say that. A child shouldn't have to. For one terrible second, his mind reached for the impossible Wren, then reality returned like a slap. This was not a ghost. This was two hungry children in a storm, and the man holding the door had a choice. Gideon stepped back. "Come in," he said, voice hoarse. "Now." The girls hesitated, trained by experience not to trust doors opening too easily. Gideon lowered himself to a kneel so he wasn't towering over them. He kept his hands visible, palms open, his tone gentle and clear. "You're safe here," he said. "Okay, you're not in trouble." The brave girl Tessa didn't relax, but she nodded once. She guided the smaller girl Lumi across the threshold, like she was escorting something precious. Gideon closed the door, shutting out the storm. The sudden quiet was startling. Lumi's shivering didn't stop, but at least the wind couldn't reach her anymore. He grabbed 2 towels from the closet and handed them over. Tessa took hers immediately, wrapping it around Lumi first, before taking care of herself. Gideon noticed that how instinctive it was, how practiced. "Kitchen," Gideon said. "We'll get you warm." He moved slowly, giving them space. No sudden motions, no pressure. In the kitchen, he turned on the lights and set a steady tone like he was building a bridge with his voice. "Sit here," he said, pointing to 2 chairs at the table. "I'm making hot chocolate and soup." Lumi perched on the edge of the seat, small hands clenched in her lap, as if afraid to leave fingerprints on kindness. Tessa stayed half-standing, shoulders, tense eyes scanning the room. Gideon warmed milk, opened a pot of soup, and placed bread on a plate. He set the food down first, proof before promises. Only then did Tessa exhale a fraction and sit. Gideon kept his voice calm. "What are your names?" Tessa swallowed. "Tessa." Lumi whispered, "Lumi." "And where are you coming from?" Gideon asked, not accusing, just careful, responsible. Tessa's gaze dropped. "Harbor House." She tightened her grip on Lumi's hand. "They said we might get moved. Not together." Gideon's chest compressed. He nodded slowly. "Okay. Thank you for telling me." Then he added the sentence, "No child ever forgets when it's real. You can eat. You can get warm. And I'm going to make the right calls so everyone knows you're safe." Lumi's shoulders sagged in relief. She looked down at the bread like it was sunlight. And very softly, like a habit she couldn't break, she whispered, "I promise. I won't get attached." Gideon stared at her, heart aching, then said quietly but firmly, "You don't have to earn safety here." Gideon watched them eat. Not in the way people usually watch children, with smiles or indulgence, but with a stillness so deep it bordered on fear, as if any sudden movement might shatter the moment. Lumi tore a piece of bread no bigger than her thumb. She brought it to her mouth slowly, carefully. Each bite was small, deliberate, measured. Tessa waited. She didn't touch her own food until Lumi had swallowed twice. Only then did Tessa break her bread in half and eat quickly, efficiently, like someone who had learned to stay alert even while hungry. Gideon's chest tightened. Children weren't supposed to eat like this. They weren't supposed to calculate kindness. Lumi glanced up at him, mid-bite eyes wide with an instinctive worry, as if checking whether she was doing it right. "It's okay," Gideon said softly. "You can eat." Lumi nodded, chewing slowly again. "I'm just making it last," she murmured. "So you don't think I'm greedy." The sentence landed like a stone dropped into water, quiet, heavy, rippling outward. Gideon turned slightly, pretending to adjust the kettle because if he didn't move, he was going to break. Tessa sipped her hot chocolate, watching him over the rim of the mug. She didn't miss anything. Children like her never did. "You live here alone?" she asked. Gideon nodded. "I do, big house," Tessa said carefully. "Too quiet?" He swallowed. "Yes." Lumi wrapped both hands around her mug, breathing in the steam. "It smells safe," she said. No one had ever described a house that way to Gideon before. He set a bowl of soup in front of them. Warm, simple, nothing fancy. He didn't want the food to feel like a performance. Tessa finally relaxed enough to lean back in her chair. "We're not supposed to run away," she said. "But they said we might have to go to different places." Lumi's spoon paused mid-air. Tessa continued, voice steady but tight. "We didn't want to forget each other." Gideon felt something shift inside him, not anger, not pity, but a fierce, quiet resolve. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "You did the right thing coming somewhere safe." Lumi nodded, then added in a whisper she clearly hadn't meant to say out loud, "I didn't know where else to go." Gideon looked at her face, so painfully familiar, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to sit down. Not as a host, but as a guardian, at least for now. Gideon didn't delay. Once the girls had eaten enough to stop shaking, he stood and picked up his phone, making sure they could see what he was doing. "I'm going to call Harbor House," he said calmly. "Not to get you in trouble, just to let them know you're safe." Tessa stiffened immediately. "They'll take us away." Gideon met her eyes. "They'll come get you when it's safe to travel, and I'll be here while we talk. You won't be alone." That mattered. Tessa nodded once, slowly, like she was agreeing to a difficult truth. He put the call on speaker. A woman answered, breathless with relief when Gideon explained who he was and where the girls were. "Thank you," she said. "We've been worried sick." The storm cut power to part of the road. Gideon kept his voice even. "They're warm. They've eaten. They're safe." Lumi leaned closer to Tessa, listening to every word. "We'll send Ms. Rowan as soon as conditions improve," the woman continued. "She's our family liaison. Could you keep them with you overnight if the roads stay closed?" Gideon glanced at the windows, rain still lashing sideways. "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "Of course." He ended the call and crouched down again, returning to their level. "You heard that," he said. "Ms. Rowan will come when it's safe. Until then, you're staying here." Lumi's shoulders sagged like a string had been cut. Relief poured out of her in a quiet exhale. Tessa hesitated. "You're not mad?" "No," Gideon said. "I'm glad you asked for help." That sentence landed differently than apologies or reassurances. It told them something about him. Gideon gestured toward the living room. "You can sit there, watch something, or just rest." Lumi took a step, then stopped. She looked back at him, eyes full of something fragile. "I promise," she said softly. "I won't make a mess." Gideon shook his head. "You don't have to be perfect to be welcome." Lumi blinked hard, nodding like she was trying to memorize the words. As the girls curled up under blankets on the couch, the television murmuring gently, Gideon stood alone in the kitchen. His house, once a vault of silence, now held 2 small heartbeats, and instead of fear, something else began to surface, a cautious, terrifying hope. When Gideon climbed the stairs, his steps slowed. He knew exactly where he was going. The hallway felt narrower than usual, the air heavier. At the end of it waited the door he hadn't opened in months. Wren's room. He stood there, hand hovering over the knob, memories pressing in from every direction. He could almost hear her voice, high, impatient, demanding bedtime stories she already knew by heart. For a moment, he considered turning back. But downstairs, 2 4-year-old girls were wrapped in borrowed blankets, trying not to take up space in a stranger's life. Gideon exhaled and turned the knob. The door opened with a soft click. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. The unicorn blanket on the bed, stuffed animals arranged carefully at the headboard, a row of children's book spines worn from small hands pulling favorites again and again. His throat tightened. He crossed the room slowly and opened the closet. Dresses sorted by color. Pajamas folded just the way Wren liked them, stars, moons, soft cotton. Gideon reached out and took 2 sets. His hands shook. He wasn't replacing Wren. He wasn't erasing her. He was choosing warmth over emptiness. When he returned downstairs, Lumi was half asleep on the couch, thumb brushing the edge of her blanket like she was grounding herself. Tessa sat upright beside her, eyes snapping to Gideon instantly. "I found these," Gideon said, gently holding up the pajamas. "They're clean. You can wear them tonight." Lumi pushed herself up, eyes widening. She reached out, then stopped short. "They're really nice," she whispered. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Gideon said. "They're meant to keep kids warm." Tessa accepted hers with a quiet nod. As Lumi padded toward the bathroom, clutching the pajamas like something precious, she paused and looked back at Gideon. "Thank you," she said. Then almost reflexively she added, "I won't get attached." The words hit him harder than thunder. Gideon watched her disappear down the hallway and whispered to the empty room, "I already am." The guest room had not been used in years. Gideon pulled 2 small beds closer together, not touching, just close enough that a hand could reach across the gap. He changed the sheets, smoothed the pillows, and placed a nightlight on the dresser. Soft amber. Nothing harsh. When the girls came in, Lumi paused at the doorway, eyes wide. "Together?" she asked. "Yes," Gideon said. "Together." Tessa exhaled, the tension easing from her shoulders for the first time that night. She guided Lumi to the bed on the left, then claimed the other without being told. They moved with quiet efficiency, like kids who didn't expect comfort to last. Gideon stood back, giving them space. "I'll be right outside," he said. "If you need anything." Lumi nodded, already fighting sleep. Tessa sat upright, hands folded in her lap, eyes tracking Gideon's every move. "Do you lock the door?" Tessa asked. Gideon didn't smile. He answered honestly, "Yes. I lock it, and I stay close." That mattered. Tessa lay down. Gideon read a short story, one with animals and gentle jokes, keeping his voice even, unhurried. He didn't rush the ending. He didn't rush them. Lumi's breathing slowed first. Her small chest rose and fell, the storm finally losing its grip on her body. Tessa followed minutes later, eyelids fluttering before surrender. Gideon turned off the main light, leaving the nightlight glowing. He closed the door softly and sat in the hallway chair he had dragged from the office. He didn't go to his bedroom. He didn't check his phone. He stayed. Thunder rolled outside, distant now. Rain softened to a steady hush. Inside the house, something fragile held together. At one point, Lumi stirred and murmured in her sleep. Gideon leaned closer to the door, listening. "It's okay," she whispered, to no one, to everyone. Gideon closed his eyes. For the first time in a year, he didn't feel alone in the dark. Morning arrived quietly. Weak sunlight slid across the hallway floor, touching Gideon's shoes, where he'd left them by the chair. His neck ached. He hadn't slept much, but it was the good kind of ache earned by vigilance rather than grief. He stood and opened the guest room door. Both beds were empty. The air went out of his lungs. For a split second, panic surged, hot and sharp, dragging old fears with it. Had they slipped away? Had he failed in the simplest way? Lumi, he called, keeping his voice calm even as his pulse raced. Tessa, no answer. He moved quickly but quietly, checking the bathroom, the living room, the kitchen. The couch was empty, blankets folded. Then he heard it. Soft footsteps upstairs. A whisper. A sound like pages turning. Gideon froze. He knew that sound. He followed it down the hall to the door he never closed anymore. Wren's room. The door stood ajar. Gideon stopped at the threshold, heart hammering, not in anger, not in fear of damage, but in the old raw ache of memory. Inside, Lumi stood on tiptoe before the photo wall. Tessa hovered behind her, vigilant, ready to apologize if needed. Lumi traced a frame with one finger. "She looks like me," she whispered. Gideon stepped in gently. "That was Wren," he said. "My daughter." Lumi turned, eyes wide. "I'm sorry. I didn't touch." "It's okay," Gideon said quickly. "You can look." Tessa studied his face, measuring sincerity. Finding it, she relaxed a fraction. They sat on the rug together. Gideon didn't give details the girls didn't need. He didn't describe the accident. He spoke of who Wren was. She liked strawberries, he said, and stories with silly endings. Lumi smiled faintly at a photo where Wren held an ice cream cone. "She looks happy." "She was," Gideon replied, and felt the word land without glass this time. Tessa glanced around the room. "You kept everything." "Yes," Gideon said. "I didn't know how not to." Lumi folded her hands in her lap. "She was lucky," she said softly. Gideon nodded, then felt the sentence that followed break him open. "She had someone who kept her pictures." Silence filled the room, thick and gentle. Gideon didn't rush to fill it. They stayed in Wren's room longer than Gideon expected. Not talking much, just being there. The light shifted, warming the colors on the walls. Dust motes drifted like slow snowfall. For the first time, the room didn't feel like a shrine. It felt like a place that remembered joy. Lumi stood and walked to the bed, stopping short of touching it. "Is it okay?" she asked. "Yes," Gideon said. "You can sit." She perched on the edge, feet not quite reaching the floor. Tessa leaned against the dresser, arms crossed, not defensive, just steady. Lumi looked at Gideon with eyes far too thoughtful for 4 years old. "When people go away," she said carefully, "do they still hear you?" Gideon swallowed. "I think they do in some way." Lumi nodded, satisfied. Then she said very quietly, "I don't think anyone would hear me. The words were not dramatic. They were not loud. They were devastating." Gideon felt something inside him give a wall he had built to survive the year finally cracking. He knelt so he was level with her. "Lumi," he said, choosing every word with care. "People hear you." She searched his face, skeptical. "Even if I'm quiet, especially then," Gideon said. Tessa's gaze flicked to him, sharp and assessing. Gideon met it without flinching. Lumi's voice wavered. "I try not to need much." Gideon nodded. "I know." Then he added firmly, "You don't have to do that here." Lumi blinked hard. A tear escaped, surprising her. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. "I didn't mean it's okay," Gideon said. "Feelings don't break things." They sat like that for a moment, adult and children sharing a truth without spectacle. Downstairs, the kettle clicked off, life continuing. Gideon stood and offered a hand, not to pull, just to invite. "How about breakfast?" Lumi hesitated, then took it. Tessa followed close. As they left the room, Gideon noticed he didn't close Wren's door all the way. He left it slightly open. And in that small choice, something shifted from guarding the past to making space for the present. Breakfast shouldn't have felt like a turning point, but it did. Gideon moved through the kitchen like someone learning a new language, how to be a person in a room with children again. He cracked eggs carefully, as if loud sounds might scare the moment away. He made toast, warmed milk, added sliced fruit to a plate without thinking, then added more because two small bodies needed more than crumbs and polite portions. Lumi sat at the table in Wren's pajamas, hands folded in her lap. Tessa sat beside her, posture, straight eyes alert. They were both 4, but they carried themselves like they'd been practicing "Don't be a problem" for years. Gideon set plates down gently. Lumi stared at the eggs, then at Gideon, then at the food again, as if waiting for a rule to reveal itself. "You can eat," Gideon said softly. Lumi picked up a piece of toast and did something that made Gideon's chest seize. She tore it into perfect little squares. Not messy, not greedy, controlled, organized, as though a neat pattern could keep the universe from changing its mind. Tessa watched Lumi's hands, then glanced at Gideon like she was reading him for danger. Gideon's voice stayed calm. "Do you do that often?" Lumi nodded. "So it's fair," she whispered. "So Tessa gets the same." Tessa's jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she took one square and pushed the rest toward Lumi. "You first," she said, like it wasn't a request, but a law. Gideon sat across from them and tried to breathe through the ache. "Thank you for trusting me last night," he said. He wasn't sure if they'd understand gratitude from an adult. Most adults gave instructions, not thanks. Tessa didn't answer. Lumi did. "We didn't have a choice," Lumi said honestly. The blunt truth wasn't rude. It was survival. Gideon nodded as if it didn't puncture him. "You did," he said gently. "You chose to ask for help. That matters." Lumi blinked, absorbing the idea like it was new math. Tessa cleared her throat, a small sound that announced she was about to negotiate. "Are they coming today?" she asked. Gideon knew who she meant. "Yes," he said. "Ms. Rowan from Harbor House is coming this morning. Roads are safer now." Lumi froze mid-bite. Tessa's eyes narrowed. "We have to go." Gideon didn't lie. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. "Yes," he said. "But we're going to do this the right way. I'll be there. I'll talk to her with you. And I'll make sure they know you're safe." Lumi's shoulders hunched. Her voice went small. "We didn't mean to, I know," Gideon said. "You didn't do anything wrong." Tessa looked down at her plate, and for the first time her armor cracked slightly. "People always say that," she muttered. "Then you get in trouble anyway." Gideon held her gaze. "Not here," he said. "Not with me." Lumi's eyes flicked up. "Even if we're annoying?" The question landed like a bruise. Gideon shook his head slowly. "You are not annoying," he said, firm enough that the words became structure. "You are children. You're allowed to need things." Lumi studied him, suspicious of comfort. Then she whispered like a habit she couldn't stop. "I can be quiet." Gideon's hands tightened around his coffee mug. He forced his voice to stay steady. "You don't have to earn kindness," he said. "Not with quiet. Not with being small." Tessa's gaze softened barely. Lumi's lip trembled. She swallowed hard and took another bite, still slow, still careful, but for the first time not apologizing with every movement. A knock sounded at the front door. Not thunder, not memory. A real knock. Gideon stood. "That'll be Ms. Rowan," he said. Tessa immediately reached for Lumi's hand. And Lumi, without looking at Gideon, whispered something so quiet it almost disappeared. "Please don't regret us." Ms. Rowan arrived with two things, warmth and paperwork. She was in her late 30s, hair pulled back in a neat bun raincoat, damp from the last of the storm. Her eyes were kind, but not careless. She looked like someone who had learned to carry other people's panic without catching fire. When Gideon opened the door, she introduced herself first, clearly and professionally. "Gideon Crosswell," she asked. "I'm Rowan Hargrove, family liaison at Harbor House. Thank you for keeping the girls safe." Gideon stepped aside. "Come in," he said. "They're in the kitchen." Tessa stiffened the moment Rowan entered. Lumi moved closer to Tessa automatically. Rowan didn't rush toward them. She crouched at a respectful distance, making herself smaller. "Hi, Tessa," she said gently. "Hi, Lumi." Lumi's fingers tightened around her pajama sleeve. Rowan's voice stayed calm. "You scared us last night," she said, not accusing, just honest. "But I'm glad you're safe." Tessa's chin lifted. "We didn't want to be split up." Rowan's expression softened, and Gideon saw something like regret in her eyes. "I know," she said. "That's what we need to talk about." Gideon pulled a chair back. "Please sit," he offered. Rowan opened a notebook, but she didn't start writing right away. She watched the girls, first reading what words couldn't capture how Lumi leaned into Tessa, how Tessa scanned for exits, how both girls kept their feet tucked under their chairs like they were ready to stand and go at any second. Rowan's gaze moved to Gideon. "You called immediately," she said. "Thank you for doing that. A lot of people don't." "I'm not trying to keep them," Gideon replied quickly. He stopped, because the truth was complicated, because he wanted to say, "That little girl has my daughter's face," but he didn't. Not yet. Not in front of them. Rowan nodded as if she understood even without words. "You did exactly what you should," she said. "Now we continue doing things the right way." She addressed the girls again. "You're coming back with me today," she said softly. "But we're not punishing you. We're going to make sure you're okay." Lumi's eyes widened. "We have to go." "Right now," Rowan nodded. "Yes, honey. But listen, Gideon can come with us to Harbor House. He can visit. He can bring your drawing books. He can keep showing up if he wants." Tessa's eyes flicked to Gideon. "A test." Gideon passed it. "I want," he said. "If that's allowed." "It is," Rowan confirmed. "Supervised visits, signed in, structured. Safe for everyone." The word safe landed differently in the room now, like a bridge being built. Rowan hesitated, then added quietly, "I also need to be honest. The proposal to transfer one of you is not final. It was a plan, not a decision." Tessa's breath hitched. "But it could happen." Rowan nodded. "It could. Unless we find a better plan." Gideon felt a hard edge rise inside him. Anger aimed not at Rowan, but at a world where children were treated like numbers in a spreadsheet. He kept his voice level. "What would be a better plan?" Rowan glanced at him careful. "A kinship placement," she said. "A stable adult who can take both girls together." Lumi's eyes lifted. Hope flashed, then fear, like a candle wavering. Tessa's voice went tight. "Adults say things." Gideon leaned forward slightly, hands on the table, voice steady as stone. "I won't promise what I can't legally do," he said. "But I can promise this: I will not disappear." Rowan's eyebrows rose, impressed, despite herself. Lumi whispered, barely audible, "People always disappear." Gideon turned to her, heart aching. "Not this time," he said softly. Rowan closed her notebook and stood. "Let's pack your things," she told the girls, "and then we'll go." Lumi slid off her chair and walked toward the guest room. Halfway there, she turned back to Gideon. Her eyes searched him like she was trying to memorize his face before it vanished. "Do you still mean it?" she asked. Gideon didn't flinch. "I mean it," he said. And for the first time, Lumi nodded like she almost believed. Harbor House smelled like crayons, oatmeal, and clean laundry. It wasn't a sad place, not in the way people imagined. It was bright, organized, staffed by tired adults doing their best. Children played in corners. Some laughed. Some watched quietly. The building hummed with fragile routines that kept everyone afloat. Gideon signed in at the front desk the way Rowan instructed. He followed every rule. No private rooms. No unsupervised contact. No promises made over other adults' authority. He didn't come to claim. He came to show up. Rowan gave him a schedule for approved visits. "Consistency matters most," she said. Gideon nodded. Then I'll be consistent. The girls sat at a small table in the common room with coloring paper and pencils. Lumi drew slowly, carefully, as if erasing too hard might erase the kindness, too. Tessa drew faster, bold lines, sharp angles, castles with walls, gates, and watchtowers. Gideon sat across from them. He didn't hover. He didn't crowd. He just stayed present like a lighthouse that didn't move. After an hour, Lumi slid her paper toward him. A drawing. 2 tiny stick figures holding hands. A storm cloud above them. And a large house with a light on. At the doorway, she'd drawn a tall figure. Gideon's throat tightened. "That's you," Lumi said quietly. He swallowed. "Is it?" Lumi nodded. "You look sad." Gideon's lips parted, then closed. He didn't lie. "I am," he admitted. Lumi studied him, then added, "But you let us in." The sentence made something in Gideon's chest unclench just a fraction. Tessa leaned forward. "If you say you're coming," she said bluntly, "you come." Gideon met her eyes. "I will." Tessa nodded once as if signing a contract. As the visit ended, Rowan walked Gideon to the entrance. "You handled that well," she said. "A lot of adults try to rush attachment. That scares kids like them." Gideon's voice was quiet. "They're trying not to take up space." Rowan's expression softened. "Yes. And that breaks hearts." When Gideon returned home that evening, the mansion felt colder than before. Not because it was empty, because it had been full and now it wasn't. He went upstairs to the guest room and stood between the 2 small beds he had pushed close together. The sheets were neatly made now. The nightlight was off. On one pillowcase, a single strand of dark hair clung to the fabric. Gideon stared at it. He knew what he should do. He should do nothing. He should accept coincidence. He should let professionals handle everything. But his mind would not release the image of Lumi's face. Ren's face. His hands shook as he carefully lifted the hair with a clean tissue, sealed it in an envelope, and set it on his desk like evidence. Then he picked up his phone and called the one person he trusted not to gossip. "Dr. Nolan Vance," Gideon said, when the call connected, voice low. "I need a kinship test." There was a pause. "Gideon, are you sure?" Gideon looked at the guest beds. 2 small dents where 2 tiny bodies had slept. His voice turned into a vow. "I've never been more sure of anything." The waiting was worse than the knowing. Gideon Crosswell learned that quickly. He kept his life orderly while the test was processed, projects submitted on time, meetings attended, polite nods exchanged, but everything inside him lived in suspension, like a breath held too long. He visited Harbor House every day he was allowed. Same time, same chair, same calm voice. Consistency, Rowan had said, was love translated into action. Lumi started greeting him with a small wave instead of hiding behind Tessa's shoulder. Tessa stopped scanning the exits every 5 minutes. Progress measured in inches, not miles. One afternoon, while the girls colored, Rowan sat beside Gideon. "You're doing this right," she said quietly. Gideon didn't look up from Lumi's drawing. "I'm terrified of doing it wrong." Rowan nodded. "That usually means you won't." When the call finally came, it was early evening. Dr. Nolan Vance didn't waste words. "The preliminary results are clear." Gideon stood. His knees felt weak. "Biological relationship confirmed," Nolan continued. "High confidence. Parental match." The room tilted. Gideon closed his eyes, pressing 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose, not to cry, but to stay upright. "They're mine," he whispered. "Yes," Nolan said gently. "At least one is confirmed. Given the circumstances, it's extremely likely both are." Gideon thanked him, hung up, and stood in silence. His reflection stared back from the window, older, hollowed, but burning with something new. Responsibility. Truth didn't feel like victory. It felt like weight. He didn't go to Harbor House that night. He sat alone in Ren's room, lights, low photographs glowing softly on the walls. He spoke her name out loud for the first time in months. Ren. The sound didn't shatter him. It anchored him. I didn't know, he said into the quiet, but I do now. The past rearranged itself piece by piece, not rewriting memory, but reframing it. Moments that never made sense now had edges. He needed answers, not to punish, to repair. Gideon made one call that night to a licensed investigator he'd used years ago during a property dispute. Maeve Klein, he said. I need help finding someone. Quietly. Legally. Marina Vale lived 2 hours north in a coastal town that smelled like salt and old books. Maeve had warned Gideon. This won't be easy. She didn't disappear, she stepped back. Gideon waited outside the small public library, heart pounding like he was about to confess a crime. Marina recognized him instantly. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just closed her eyes. I knew this day would come, she said. They sat in a quiet meeting room, sunlight slanting through narrow windows. Marina's hands trembled as she wrapped them around a paper cup of tea. I had twins, she began. 4 years ago. The words hit him, even though he'd prepared for them. I was alone, she continued. No family. No safety net. You were married then. You panicked. Gideon didn't interrupt. He deserved every second. I kept both girls at first, Marina said, but I couldn't give them stability. I made the worst choice of my life thinking it was mercy. Her voice broke. I brought one to you. Left her at your door. I thought she'd have a future. Ren Gideon whispered. Marina nodded. I placed the other at Harbor House. I told myself I'd come back when I could. Silence filled the room, not accusation, not forgiveness. Truth. I visited Lumi whenever I could, Marina said. From a distance, I never crossed lines. I didn't want to confuse her. Gideon swallowed. They ran because they were afraid of being separated. Marina closed her eyes again. I promised them they wouldn't be. The weight of shared failure settled between them. I'm not here to take them from you, Marina said quietly. I know what you can offer. I just didn't want them to grow up invisible. Gideon looked at her, really looked, and saw not a villain but a woman crushed by impossible choices. I want to do this right, he said. Legally. With support. With you involved in a healthy way. Marina nodded slowly, tears slipping free. That's all I ever wanted. Rowan listened without interruption. When Gideon finished explaining, she closed her folder gently. This changes everything, she said. In the best way. The process moved not fast, but forward. Kinship placement paperwork. Background checks already cleared. Home evaluations updated. Counseling scheduled for everyone involved. Nothing rushed. Everything intentional. The day Gideon told the girls, he knelt so he was eye level with them. I learned something important, he said carefully. Tessa crossed her arms ready. Lumi leaned in. You don't have to answer now, Gideon continued. And you don't have to feel anything right away. He breathed in. I'm your dad. Silence. Then Lumi whispered, like, really, yes, Gideon said. Really. Tessa stared at him for a long moment. Then she asked the only question that mattered. You're not leaving? No, Gideon said. I'm staying, Tessa nodded once. Decision made. Lumi's face crumpled, not in fear, but release. She launched herself into his arms, small and fierce. I have a dad, she said, stunned. Gideon held both girls' careful grounding present. I'm here, he whispered, and I'm not going anywhere. That night when the papers were signed and the future finally had shape, Gideon brought them home. The mansion didn't echo anymore. It breathed. 2 small beds were placed side by side in a sunlit room. Ren's drawings were framed, not hidden, not erased. At bedtime, Lumi asked, Can we say goodnight to her? Gideon nodded. They stood quietly beneath the photo wall. Thank you, Lumi whispered. for keeping our place." Gideon closed his eyes. The house held them all past, present, and something like peace. The courthouse was quiet. No cameras, no speeches, just soft footsteps and the low hum of air conditioning. Gideon sat between Lumi and Tessa on a wooden bench polished by decades of waiting hands. Lumi swung her feet slowly. Tessa sat still, alert, watching every adult like she was mapping their intentions. The judge looked over his glasses and smiled, not performative, just kind. "Today," he said, "we finalize a kinship adoption." Lumi leaned toward Gideon and whispered, "Is this the part where we stay?" Gideon nodded. "Yes." The clerk slid a form across the desk. Full names of the children. Gideon glanced at the girls. "You can say them." Lumi straightened, voice small but clear. "Lumi Crosswell." Tessa followed, steady as stone. "Tessa Crosswell." The pen scratched across paper. Ink binding, ordinary, permanent. The judge nodded. "Do you understand what this means?" Tessa answered first. "It means he's not temporary." The judge smiled. "That's a very good understanding." Lumi squeezed Gideon's hand. "Do we still get to be together?" Gideon's voice didn't shake. "Always." The stamp came down with a soft final thud. Not loud, not dramatic, but life-changing. Outside, sunlight spilled across the steps. Lumi squinted, smiling like the light itself had chosen her. "Are we home now?" she asked. Gideon looked at both girls and answered without hesitation. "Yes," he said. "You are." The cemetery was quiet in the way that respected voices. Gideon hadn't planned to bring the girls so soon, but Lumi had asked that morning carefully. "Can we say hello to her?" So they came. Wren's headstone was simple, white, clean. Sunflowers rested at its base. Lumi knelt first, placing a small drawing beside the flowers. 2 stick figures holding hands under a big house. "That's us," she whispered. "And that's you." Tessa stood back, serious. Then she stepped forward and placed her hand on the stone, not pressing, just resting. "She kept our place," Tessa said quietly. "Didn't she?" Gideon swallowed hard. "Yes." Lumi tilted her head, thinking. Then she spoke words that seemed far too big for 4 years old. "Thank you for waiting," she said. "We found him." The wind moved gently through the trees. No thunder, no rain, just stillness that didn't hurt. Gideon stood behind them, one hand on each small shoulder. He didn't feel torn anymore. He felt aligned. Loss hadn't vanished, but it had softened, shaped into something that could live alongside love. As they walked away, Lumi looked back once. "She's not lonely," she said with certainty. "She has us." And Gideon realized the past was no longer a wound. It was a bridge. The house sounded different now. Footsteps, laughter, a dropped spoon clattering against tile. Lumi ran down the hallway barefoot, calling Gideon's name just to hear him answer. Tessa followed, slower, observant, making sure nothing disappeared. Dinner was simple. Soup, bread, too much conversation. Afterward, they sat on the living room floor, drawing. Lumi-colored suns. Tessa drew walls, then erased them. At bedtime, Lumi hesitated at the doorway of the shared room. "Will you still be here in the morning?" she asked. Gideon knelt, eyes level with hers. "Every morning," he said. "And if I ever leave, I'll always come back." She nodded, satisfied. As the lights dimmed, Lumi whispered from her bed, "I don't need to be quiet anymore, right?" Gideon's chest tightened. "Right," Tessa added, half asleep. "And we don't have to earn it, no," Gideon said softly. "You already belong." The house settled around them, not silent, not loud, alive. Down the hall, Wren's photo caught the soft glow of a nightlight. No longer a shrine, a memory, a guide. Gideon turned off the lights and paused, listening to the sound of 2 children breathing safely in sleep. Once this house held only echoes. Now it held a future. And for the first time, Gideon didn't feel like he was surviving. he was home. Did this story leave a lasting impression on you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, rate it from 1 to 10, and tap the end screen to see another heartwarming story waiting for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, then tap the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. Until our next story.